Good morning, Team Alabama. Please find the Diary of Anne Frank on your Chromebook. You're looking for page 498. Page 498 today. You should be getting close to 30 to 40 facts. Your goal is to have 50 to 70 facts for this book. And we've had a ton of vocab words already. So you should be at the getting close to 10 vocab words also. It's probably about time for us to start asking some questions about what you think is going on. How does Anne feel? Okay, so I want you to think about some questions while we read today, and then at the very end, we're going to add some questions. Okay, page 498. Mr. Frank, he isn't used to girls. Give him a little time. Time? Isn't 2 months time? I could cry, catching hold of Margot. Come on, Margot, dance with me. Come on, please. Margot, I have to help with supper. You know we're going to forget how to dance. When we get out, we won't remember a thing. She starts to sing and dance by herself. Mr. Frank takes her in his arms, waltzing with her, and Mrs. Van Daan comes in from the bathroom. Mrs. Van Daan, next. She looks around as she starts putting on her shoes. Where's Peter? As they are dancing, where would he be? He hasn't finished his lessons, has he? His father'll kill him if he catches him in there with that cat and his work's not done. Mr. Frank and Anne finish their dance. They bow to each other with extravagant formality. Very formal. Anne, get him out of there, will you? Anne at Peter's door. Peter! Peter! Opening the door a crack. What is it? Your mother says to come out. I'm giving Mooshie his dinner. You know what your father says. She sits on the couch, sewing on the lining of her fur coat. For heaven's sakes, I haven't even looked at him since lunch. I'm just telling you, that's all. I'll feed him. I don't want you in here, or in there. Peter. Peter to Anne. Then give him his dinner and come right out. You hear? He comes back to the table and Anne shuts the door of Peter's room after her and disappears behind the curtain covering his closet. Mrs. Van Daan to Peter. Now, is that any way to talk to your little girlfriend? Mother, for heaven's sakes, will you please stop saying that? Look at him blush. Look at him. Please, I am not. Anyway, let me alone, will you? He acts like it was something to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be ashamed of to have a little girlfriend. You're crazy. She's only 13. So what? And you're 16. Just perfect. Your father's 10 years older than I am. To Mr. Frank. I warn you, Mr. Frank, if this war lasts much longer, we're going to be related and then Mazel Tov, Mr. Frank says, deliberately changing the conversation. Mrs. Frank. I wonder where Meep is. She's usually so prompt. Suddenly, everything else is forgotten. As they hear the sound of an automobile coming to a screeching stop in the street below, they are tense, motionless in their terror. The car starts away and a wave of relief sweeps over them. They pick up their occupations again, and Anne flings open the door of Peter's room, making a dramatic entrance. She is dressed in Peter's clothes, and Peter looks at her in fury. The others are amused. Good evening, everyone. Forgive me if I don't stay. She jumps up on a chair. I have a friend waiting for me in there, my friend Tom Cat. Some people say that we look alike, but Tom has the most beautiful whiskers and I have only a little fuzz. I am hoping in time. All right, Mrs. Quack Quack, Peter says to her. Anne, outraged, jumping down. Peter! I heard about you, how you talk so much in class they call you Mrs. Quack Quack. And how Mr. Smitter made you write a composition, quack, quack, said Mrs. Quack, quack. Well, go on, tell them the rest, how it was so good that he read it out loud to the class and then read it to all his other classes. Quack, 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 quack. Anne pulls off the coat and trousers. You are the most intolerable, insufferable boy I have ever met. She throws the clothes down the stairwell and Peter goes down after him. Quack, quack, quack. Mrs. Van Daan to Anne. That's right, Annicky. Give it to him. With all the boys in the world, why, I had to get locked up with one like you. Quack, quack, quack. And from now on, stay out of my room. As Peter passes her, Anne puts out her foot, tripping him. He picks himself up and goes on into his room. Mrs. Frank quietly. Anne, dear, your hair. She feels Anne's forehead. You're warm, and are you feeling all right? Please, Mother. She goes over to the center table, slipping into her shoes, Mrs. Frank following her. You haven't a fever, have you? Anne pulling away. No, no. You know, we can't call a doctor here ever. There's only one thing to do. Watch carefully. Prevent an illness before it comes. Let me see your tongue. Mother, this is perfectly absurd. Ridiculous. Anne, dear, don't be such a baby. Let me see your tongue. As Anne refuses, Mrs. Frank appeals to Mr. Frank. Otto, you hear your mother, Anne. Anne flicks out her tongue for a second and then turns away. Come on, open up. As Anne opens her mouth very wide, you seem all right, but perhaps an aspirin. For heaven's sakes, don't give that child any pills. I waited for 15 minutes this morning for her to come out of the WC. I was washing my hair. I think there's nothing the matter with our Anne that a ride on her bike or a visit with her friend Jopie DeWall wouldn't cure. Isn't that so, Anne? Mr. Van Daan comes down into the room. From outside, we hear faint sounds of bombers going over and a burst of ack. Meep not come yet? The workman just left a little while ago. What's for dinner tonight? Beans? Not again. Poor Pooty. I know, but what can we do? That's all that Meep brought us. Mr. Van Daan starts to pace, his hands behind his back, and Anne follows behind him, imitating him. We are now in what is known as the bean cycle. Beans boiled, beans in casserole, beans with strings, beans without strings. Peter has come out of his room. He slides into his place at the table and becoming immediately absorbed in his studies. Mr. Van Daan to Peter, I saw you in there playing with your cat. He just went in for a second to putting his coat away. He's been out here all the time doing his lessons. Mr. Frank looking up from the paper. Anne, you got an excellent in your history paper today and a very good in Latin. Anne sitting beside him. How about algebra? I'll have to make a confession. Up until now, I've managed to stay ahead of you in algebra. Today, you caught up with me. We'll leave it to Margot to correct. Anne, isn't algebra vile, Pim? Vile. Margot to Mr. Frank. How do I do? Anne getting up. Excellent, 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 excellent. Mr. Frank to Margot. You should have used the subjunctive here. Should I? I thought, look here, I didn't use it here. The two became absorbed in the papers. Mrs. Van Daan, may I try on your coat? No, Anne. Mrs. Van Daan giving it to Anne. It's all right. Be careful. Anne puts it on and struts with it. Struts is a fancy walk. So she's got the fur coat on and she's fancy walking. My father gave me that the year before he died. He always bought the best that money could buy. Mrs. Van Daan, did you have a lot of boyfriends before you were married? Anne, that's a personal question. It's not courteous to ask personal questions. Mrs. Van Daan, oh, I don't mind, to Anne. Our house was always swarming with boys. When I was a girl, we had, oh God, not again. Okay, so Mrs. Van Daan was kind of a little bit of a flirt when she was younger, and a little bit of a, we'll call it hoochie mama, a little fast. So, Mrs. Van Daan, shut up. Without a pause to Anne, Mr. Van Daan mimics Mrs. Van Daan, speaking the first few words in unison with her. One summer, we had a big house in Hilversum, and the boys came buzzing around like bees around a jam pot. And when I was 16, we were wearing our skirts very short those days, and I had good-looking legs. She pulls up her skirt, going to Mr. Frank. And she's kind of flirting with Mr. Frank. How would you feel if you were Mrs. Frank? I still have them. I may not be as pretty as I used to be, but I still have my legs. How about it, Mr. Frank? Mr. Van Daan, all right, we see him. I'm not asking you, I'm asking Mr. Frank. Mother, for heaven's sakes, says Peter. Mrs. Van Daan, oh, I embarrass you, do I? Well, I just hope the girl you marry has as good. Then to Anne, my father used to worry about me with so many boys hanging around. He told me, if any of them gets fresh, you say to him, remember, Mr. So-and-so, remember, I'm a lady. Remember, Mr. So-and-so, remember, I'm a lady, Anne repeats. She gives Mrs. Van Daan her coat. Look at you talking that way in front of her. Don't you know she puts it all down in that diary? So if she does, I'm only telling the truth. Anne stretches out, putting her ear to the floor, listening to what is going on below. The sound of bombers fade away. Mrs. Frank setting the table. Would you mind, Peter, if I moved you over to the couch? Anne listening. Meat must have the radio on. Peter picks up his papers, going over to the couch beside Mrs. Van Daan. Mr. Van Daan, accusingly to Peter, haven't you finished yet? No. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. All right, I'm a dunce. I'm a hopeless case. Why do I go on? You're not hopeless. Don't talk that way. It's just that you haven't anyone to help you like the girls have. To Mr. Frank, maybe you could help him, Mr. Frank. I'm sure that his father, not me, I can't do anything with him. He won't listen to me. You go ahead if you want. Mr. Frank going to Peter. What about it, Peter? Shall we make our school co-educational, meaning girls and boys? Mrs. Van Daan kissing Mr. Frank. You're an angel, Mr. Frank, an angel. I don't know why I didn't meet you before I met that one there. Here, sit down, Mr. Frank. She forces him down on the couch beside Peter. Now, Peter, you listen to Mr. Frank. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. Have you noticed how Mrs. Van Daan's a little flirty with Mr. Frank and that she kissed him? Okay, and she asked him to dance. And I am not so sure if I was Mrs. Frank if I would be okay with that. So you write a couple of facts about what you think about Mrs. Van Daan. Okay, write a few facts about what you think about Mrs. Van Daan. Okay, have a great rest of your day, Team Alabama.